January 17, 1943. 24,000 feet above the hostile expanse of northern Germany. The air temperature outside the fuselage plunges to 40 degrees below zero. Inside the cramped tail section of a heavy bomber, Sergeant Bill Henson sees the enemy rising. Black specks that quickly sharpen into Messerschmitt fighters, closing fast. He aligns his sights. He grips the twin spade grips of his trusted Browning M2. He presses the trigger. Silence. The weapon is solid. The feed belt shudders, the metallic chain of ammunition jammed tight, refusing to move. The bolt locks open, useless, as tracers streak past the plexiglass. Another bomber spirals down, already a streak of fire descending through the clouds. In that moment of icy failure, a terrible truth was reaffirmed. The weapon designed to protect American airmen was failing them. Historical context. A crisis in steel. The Browning M2, the legendary .50 caliber machine gun, John Browning's final masterpiece, was the backbone of American firepower. Every heavy bomber mounted multiple copies. The 8th Air Force in England alone relied on thousands of these guns across its B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators. But in the brutal environment of high-altitude combat, the weapon could become a death sentence. Above 20,000 feet, where temperatures dropped below -30 Fahrenheit, lubricants thickened, metal contracted, and microscopic tolerances vanished. Reports from the winter of 1942 into early 1943 told the same story. Weapons freezing at altitude, feed systems binding, bursts that should have been a solid curtain of fire breaking into silence. Crews logged malfunction rates that crippled formations. Mission debriefs described guns that failed at the first pass and could not be made to run again in the thin Arctic air. The Ordnance Department pursued every conventional remedy: new cold weather oils, heating sleeves, ammunition stowage changes, and tighter machining. Yet crews still faced the same sickening clunk. The malfunction problem remained stubborn, persistent, and deadly. The symbol. The chain of confidence. Back home, America's industry labored under the promise of unmatched productivity. But the true measure of wartime production was not quantity. It was trust. The problem was not the weight of steel, but the precision of its movement. The heart of every automatic weapon is its feed. The rhythmic, continuous delivery of metallic promise. For the M2, it was the ammunition belt itself, disintegrating steel links feeding a steady heartbeat of fire. We call it the chain of confidence. It is the trust placed by a freezing gunner in the hands of American labor. It is the connection between the factory floor and the fight for freedom. And in 1943, that chain was broken. Engineers watched equations. Range officers watched failure. At Eglin Field in Florida, in controlled cold-soaked trials, weapons that ran on the ground would seize after minutes in simulated high-altitude chill. The lesson was painful. The M2 did not need more theory. It needed to be understood in motion. The unconventional solution. The breakthrough did not come from a new blueprint. It came from a new way of listening to the gun. In Kentucky and at Navy and Army proving grounds, Marine Ordnance Officer and self-taught gunsmith George M. Chinn approached the Browning M2, not as a problem of theory, but as a living mechanism. Chinn filmed the gun in slow motion. He studied the feed cycle frame by frame, the belt entering the tray, the extractor claw finding the rim, the cartridge pivoting toward the chamber. What he saw was small, but decisive. At the moment of transfer, the round met the bolt face at a slight angle. At room temperature, the system tolerated the drag. At extreme cold, That microscopic misalignment became catastrophic friction. Chinn's remedy was brutally simple and completely practical. Change the geometry the gun experienced, not the dimensions a drawing demanded. He adjusted the feed tray ramp and cam path, bending the thin guide plate a few degrees to correct the presentation of the cartridge. No new part numbers, no exotic metals, just alignment. The second adjustment. Geometry alone would not carry the day. Chinn and fellow ordnance teams paired the alignment fix with ruthless attention to headspace and timing, the precise relationship between bolt, barrel, and firing sequence. Crews standardized the practice with simple gauges, turning a once temperamental ritual into a fast, reliable routine performed before takeoff and again on the hardstand in England. They refined belt handling, inspected links, and trained gunners to feed with proper belt tension, neither starving the gun nor overdriving the pawls. The M2 wasn't just modified, it was retaught how to run under the conditions where men depended on it most. The result was unmistakable, a smooth, sustained, flawless stream of fire. The cartridge now met the chamber on the center line. Friction vanished, reliability returned. The transformation in combat. The evidence arrived in test logs first, then in combat reports. At Aberdeen and Eglin, cold soak firings that once ended in seizure ran to belt exhaustion without a single stoppage. In squadron diaries across East Anglia, gunners recorded a shift from frequent jams at altitude to guns ran clean for entire pass. Armorer teams circulated through bomber stations, bending feed ramps to the new geometry, drilling headspace and timing like a pre-flight prayer, and scrubbing belts for damaged links. Within months, formations that had braced for silence now trusted the thunder of their guns again. The numbers fell in the right direction. The fear receded. Emotional contrast, the enemy's realization. German fighter pilots had learned the American pattern. The initial burst, then the fade, then the gap that let them close. They counted on it. But in the spring and summer of 1943, something changed. Intelligence summaries taken from captured pilots and recovered diaries noted the difference with blunt respect. American gunners maintained continuous fire through the attack run. The old weakness had disappeared. A Luftwaffe line officer wrote it more simply. The American guns do not stop. They fire until you disappear. What the enemy felt as a wall of tracer was, inside each bomber, the return of trust. The chain of confidence pulling round after round with metronomic certainty. Transformation and legacy. George M. Chinn never grandstanded his work. He wrote it down. In the years after the war, he compiled The Machine Gun, a monumental study of automatic weapons that distilled the lesson of 1943 to a single principle. Mechanisms must be proven in motion, not assumed on paper. The M2 that defended bombers became the same M2 on tanks, ships, and later helicopters. Its core design unchanged, because its wartime remedies addressed reality, not theory. From the headspace and timing gauge in a waist gunner's pocket, to the bent feed tray that aligned a cartridge's tiny journey, the fixes turned a masterpiece into a legend. Doctrines of American small arms were shaped by that winter. Tolerance for extremes, field simplicity over laboratory elegance, and training that prizes function over dimensions. A generation of weapons, from flexible aircraft guns to vehicle mounts, carried those ideas forward. Epilogue: the unbroken rhythm. Today, the Browning M2 remains the longest-serving machine gun in American military history. Its total production reaches into the millions, and everyone carries the spirit of those wartime corrections. The practiced gauge touch, the aligned feed, The insistence that a weapon be judged by the way it breathes under stress. The chain of confidence endures. Every round that glides through those steel links, in the cold of the Arctic, the heat of the desert, or the salt, thick air at sea, is a tribute to practical wisdom over dogma. This story is written in steel. It is a lesson that solving problems matters more than obeying drawings, that the most important innovations often come from hands that listen. The rhythm of the M2 continues across generations. It is the steady, certain sound of a nation's ingenuity, reminding us that sometimes the smallest corrections, born of patience and conviction, make the mightiest instruments of freedom unstoppable. The echo of ingenuity, every era rediscovers the same truth. Technology wins battles, but reliability wins wars. The Browning M2's revival in 1943 was not simply a mechanical triumph. It was a lesson in American problem-solving itself. When theories failed, hands took over. When bureaucracy stalled, imagination moved faster. That spirit, call it craftsmanship, call it instinct, runs through every generation of U.S. engineering. It is why the same weapon that guarded bombers over Germany guarded convoys in Iraq 6 decades later. Its sound unchanged. A deep, confident thunder that told friend and foe alike that the line still holds. Even today, armorers at American bases perform the same ritual taught by George Chinn. Checking headspace, setting timing, listening for that smooth, uninterrupted rhythm that means perfection has been achieved once again by feel. America's unlikely teacher, George M. Chinn's name seldom appears beside generals or presidents in the chronicles of victory. Yet his philosophy, machines must be understood by touch as much as by measurement, became a quiet manifesto for every armorer, machinist, and mechanic who followed. He showed that the strength of American warfare was not just in its arsenals, but in its empathy with the tools it created. That human element, the willingness to feel where the machine hesitated, is what separated success from catastrophe. When Chinn later wrote The Machine Gun, he dedicated it not to scientists or officers, but to the men who must keep them firing. That dedication still resonates across workshops and firing ranges, wherever a Browning M2 sits waiting for the next test burst. The enduring legacy. More than 80 years have passed since those freezing flights over Europe. Yet the .50 cal Browning remains the longest-serving weapon in U.S. history. A symbol of durability, design, and faith in human intuition. Its lineage reaches into every corner of American defense. From aircraft wings to Humvee turrets, from the decks of carriers to remote mountaintops. The blueprint changed, the metals improved, but the principle stayed the same. Trust the craftsman who listens to the steel. Each cartridge that slides into the chamber carries that heritage forward. Each perfectly timed burst echoes a promise first kept in the winter sky of 1943. Epilogue. The sound that never stops. The sound is unmistakable. A low, deliberate hammering that speaks of endurance and resolve. To the generations who have heard it, it is more than noise. It is history and motion. From the frozen clouds over Germany to the deserts of the Middle East, the Browning M2's voice has never faltered. And behind that voice lies a story of ingenuity born from frustration. Of one Marine gunsmith who listened closely enough to let a machine reveal its secret. That secret was simple. Perfection is not rigidity, it is rhythm. As long as that rhythm continues, so too does the legacy of American innovation, proving that sometimes the smallest act of understanding can make the mightiest weapon unstoppable. more episodes where maps meet money and missiles. Subscribe to GeoStrat.